Hey, it's Nick, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you how I got the drum tones in this song. Like I said earlier, I'm going to show you how to get your drums to sound exactly like this. All the plugins I'll be using will be in the description below. Most of the plugins I'm using are part of monthly subscriptions that you guys probably have. There might be a couple you don't have. And I've included a download link for this Logic mix template, so you guys can download it. That way you don't have to hear me talk if you don't want to, and you don't have to sit and watch through this whole video. Now, I'm going to be running through these settings kind of fast, so please feel free to pause it or take screenshots if you can't download the mix template. So as far as the drum samples go, I use Drum Daddy, and I use the Pop Punk Kit 1 preset in Drum Daddy. On the kick, the only thing I changed was I flattened out the EQ on the overhead channel, and then I turned the girth up all the way, and I turned the attack up so it was just barely all the way. On the snare, the first thing I did was I changed the snare from snare 2 to snare 1. And then I lowered the pitch -2, and I lowered the pitch on the overheads in the rooms as well so they all matched. And then I turned the girth down just a little bit, and I turned the stank up just a little bit, and I turned the attack up all the way. As far as the toms, I didn't touch a single thing. I left them how it was in the preset. And then the cymbals, I left everything the same, except I turned up the high frequency on the overhead channel just a little bit, and then I turned down the low mids just a little bit. Other than that, the only other thing I did in Drum Daddy was I routed out all of the channels in Drum Daddy out into my DAW so I could throw my own plugins on them or automate them or do whatever I needed to them. And if you don't know how to do that, I have videos on my channel explaining how to do that for specific DAWs if you don't know how to route your Drum Daddy. The way I routed mine on here for mixing purposes was I sent the kick, the snare, and all the toms to their own tracks, which you can see I have right here. And then I sent all of the direct cymbal mics, which was the hi-hat, China, splash, and ride, to their own track right here called cymbals. And then I sent the overhead channels for the kick, toms, and all the cymbals to their own track right here called overhead. I did not send the snare overhead to that track. I ended up sending the snare overhead in Drum Daddy to its own track in Logic called Snare Overhead right here because I wanted to put on an EQ specifically on just that snare overhead. And then I just sent all of the room channels in Drum Daddy to this track called Room in Logic. Once I had all of my channels in Drum Daddy routed into Logic, and I had all my tracks here in Logic, then I started throwing on plugins. We'll start with the kick drum. The only plugin I had on the kick drum track was just this EQ, and all I did on this EQ was I cut off the low shelf around 30 hertz, and then I did a 1.6 decibel boost around 90 hertz, and then I did a 10 decibel cut around 320 hertz to take out that like thuddiness I didn't like in the kick. Then I just did a 2.4 decibel cut around 2700 hertz with I boosted the high shelf 3 decibels around 4600 hertz. Over on the snare drum, I had a lot more going on than all the other drums. The first thing I had on here was just another EQ, and on this EQ, I boosted a 3.1 decibel boost around 170 hertz, and then I gave it another 2.1 decibel boost around 3600 hertz, and then I guess I have this little 0.8 decibel boost around 4600 hertz. Not sure if that's even doing anything. Might not even need that one. And then I just topped it off with cutting the high shelf 4.6 decibels around 10,000 hertz. The next plugin I had on the snare track in the chain was the Waves R bass, and I had this set so that the intensity was at negative 13.8 with the frequency at 96. The third plugin in the snare channel, I had the Slate VMR rack, and I threw on the FG Stress. On the FG Stress, I had the input at a little under 7, with the attack as slow as it can go and the release as fast as it can go. And then the output was just like 4.5, it looks like. and the ratio was at 6.1. And then I had the mix knob right in the middle just to get a good blend of both. Then the fourth plugin on the snare track was the SSL Native Flex Verb. This was just kind of adding a little more wideness to the snare drum. On here, I had the pre-delay on 0 milliseconds, the diffusion on 71.8, I had the size on 70%, and then the reverb time was on 865. And then over on the EQ on this reverb, down here I had the first little EQ channel turned off, so it wasn't even being used. The second one here, I had the gain at 4.8 decibels, and the frequency was at 177 hertz. On the third channel on this EQ, I had the gain at -6 decibels, and the frequency was around 230 hertz. I had the fourth channel not turned on, and then I had the fifth channel on with the gain at 2.6 decibel boost, and the frequency was at 3,700 hertz. And then I had the last channel turned off on here. Over here, I had the threshold set to 18.9, and I had the mix at 55% so that it was still getting enough of the dry snare, and I wasn't losing the sound of the actual snare. It was just adding more of a background wideness to it. I'll show you what it sounds like with and without that. And then the final plugin I had on the snare track was the Kilo Hearts Transient Shaper. And all I really did on here is I boosted the attack 5%, and I boosted the sustain 3%, and I didn't touch anything else. I left the toms exactly how they were. I liked how they sounded in the preset. I didn't want to touch them. I left the cymbals how they were. On the overhead track in Logic, I just added an EQ, and I just did a 1.5 decibel cut around 3,600 hertz just to take out some of those harsh frequencies and the overheads I didn't want in the song. I didn't have anything on the room track. Then on the snare overhead, I had on this EQ where I did a pretty wide boost. It was a 4.8 decibel boost at like 1,300 hertz-ish. And it's pretty wide, as you can see. It just really brought out that like sizzle in the snare overhead, which made it sound a little more realistic. And once I had all my drum tracks in Logic situated and leveled out the way I kind of wanted them to sound, I then sent all these drum tracks to 3 separate drum buses in Logic. In Logic, I did that by highlighting all the drum tracks, going to output, going down to bus, and then choosing the bus I wanted. On mine, I chose bus 2. That created my first drum bus. And then to create the other 2 drum buses, I kept all those tracks highlighted, went up to the sends area, clicked on whatever was free spot there was, went down to bus, chose the bus I wanted again, then did the same thing for the fourth, which then left me with these 3 drum buses I have right here. I have my drum bus 1, 2, and 3. And on the first drum bus, I just had the Logic Bit Crusher, and I had the drive at 5 decibels, and I had the resolution up on 24 bits, and then I don't think I even touched these knobs. I think they were just left like that. And then after the Bit Crusher on the first drum bus was the Logic Vintage VCA compressor. And I had the threshold was at 32.5, the ratios at 2.6.1. I had the makeup gain turned up to 3.5. The knee was at 0.7, and I had the attack on 200 milliseconds with the release on 5 milliseconds. And I made sure that I had the auto gain turned off so that the only red light that was on was this one right here. I don't think I touched anything else on here. And then over on drum bus 2, I had on the Slate VMR again. And on here, I had the FG Stress, and I had the input on this one set to 3. The attack was set to about 4.5 with the release at 5. I had the output at 8, and the ratio was at 6.1, and the mix was all the way up on this one. And on my third drum bus, I had no plugins on it. This was just my dry drum bus to like kind of mix in the just the dry shells how they are. And once I had these 3 drum buses figured out, I highlighted the 3 buses I made for my drums, and I set the output to a 4th bus. So all 3 of these buses were going to one singular bus, which was right here. I named it Drum Kit. This is the full thing. This is all the drum buses. This is everything in this one track. And it just makes it easier so that I could automate the whole kit up and down a lot faster without having to automate all 3 of these tracks. And I can top it off with whatever other plugins I want over the whole thing, just to kind of glue it a little bit more together. And on this final drum bus, I had the Slate VMR, and I threw on the Air EQ Earth and the Air EQ Air. And I'm pretty sure I only touched the big knobs on these 2 EQs. On the Air EQ Earth, I had the big knob was set to, what does that say? About 2.5 decibels. And then it had the Air EQ Air set to 2.3 decibels. And then I topped off this final drum bus with the Wolf compressor. And on here, I had the compression, the wow, and the lo-fi all the way down to 0%. I only boosted the output 0.5. And I made sure I had the noise turned off because this just creates static noise. It's supposed to sound like an old tape. And then over in the advanced controls down here, which you get to by clicking these 3 little dots, the only things over here I changed was I turned the attack so that it was on 8.0 and the release was on 0.1. And so now with all of that, it left me with my drums sounding like this. And now that leaves me with one final part to go through. I have this filter drum part right here that sounds something like this. And the way I created that was I just copied the same Drum Daddy settings onto a new MIDI track. I didn't route any of the outputs in Drum Daddy to individual tracks. I just turned them all to default this time for this filter drum part so that they're all just going to this one track right here. And in Drum Daddy, the only things I changed on here was I turned the high frequency and the high mids just up a little bit, and then I turned the overhead and the room channels up a little bit. And then I turned the stank up all the way and the attack all the way down, and it left the kick sounding really cool. And then on the snare, I turned the overheads up, and then I boosted the rooms up kind of a lot. And I just made sure the stank was all the way up, and I turned the attack a little bit down so that it wasn't so in your face, because I wanted it to be more ringy and just really gross sounding. And then I didn't do anything with the toms because there were none used on this part. And on the cymbals, I muted everything, and I only had the rooms going, and I boosted the room channel a lot. And then I cranked the high frequencies on the rooms and just kind of turned down these other ones just a little bit. And the final thing I did on this Drum Daddy was I selected the room track, and I turned down the volume for the left and right crash on the room channel so that the left crash was at -28 and the right crash was at -34, just so there wasn't too much cymbals in that room mic after I compressed the balls out of everything, which now I'll get to that. So over on this filter drum track, the first plugin I had on here was just an EQ, and I just did a 1.8 decibel cut around 3100 hertz just to take out some of the harsh frequencies again. The next thing I had on here, I put the Wolf compressor back on here. Pretty much kind of similar settings. I had the comp, wow, and lo-fi, all the way down again. I had the output up a little bit more. It was at 4.5 decibel boost. And then over on the attack and release, I had the attack on 1.4 and the release on 0.2. And I think that was all I touched on there. And after the Wolf compressor, I threw on the Slate VMR one more time. Apparently I love using this thing because I use it a lot. But on this Slate VMR for this filtered drum part, I had the input set to about 6.5. The attack was about 5.5, with the release at about 5.5. The output was at about 6.5. Ratio was at 6.1, and the mix was in the middle again for this one, which leaves me to one last plugin on here, and it looks like I threw on another EQ. Not sure if this was really doing much, but I threw on one final EQ into this channel strip, and all I did on here was I did a 3 decibel cut around 2900 hertz, and it looks like there was a 0.5 decibel boost around the 6500 hertz, maybe just to add a little more high end to it. And after that, I left the drum sounding really cool and washy.